Hey everyone, and welcome. So today we're jumping into one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask. What does it actually mean to be alive? It sounds so simple, right? But as you're about to see, that line between living and non-living is, well, it's way blurrier and a whole lot more fascinating than you might think. We're going to go on a journey from the biology textbook you remember from school to the far-out frontiers of astrobiology, and then land right in the heart of philosophy.
All right, let's kick things off with a little bit of a puzzle. What is the real difference between a virus and a star? I mean, think about it. One's this tiny little packet of code that can cause total chaos, and the other is a gigantic fusion reactor hanging out in space. They're both incredibly complex physical systems, but we only really think of one of them as being kinda, sorta alive. So why is that? This question, it really gets to the core of what we're talking about today. Defining life is not as easy as just checking a few boxes. So, before we can explore those blurry edges, we've got to start with the solid center. What does the standard biology textbook actually say life is? Well, it turns out scientists have come up with a set of common traits that pretty much all living things on Earth seem to share. This right here, this is the classic biological checklist. And it makes sense, right? Think about anything from a tiny bacterium to a massive blue whale. They all work to keep their insides stable. That's homeostasis, kind of like how your body stays at the same temperature. They're made of cells, they burn energy through metabolism, they grow, they adapt over generations, they react when you poke them, and of course, they make more of themselves. If something ticks all these boxes, yeah, we're pretty comfortable calling it alive. Okay, but that checklist just tells us what life does. It doesn't tell us a single thing about where it came from. And that is the next, even bigger mystery. How in the world do you get something that can tick all those boxes from a planet that's just a bunch of non-living chemicals? How does life actually pop up from non-life? The fancy scientific term for this whole process is abiogenesis. And the most important thing to get here is that science doesn't see this as some single magical moment, like someone just flipped a switch from off to on. Nope. It was almost certainly a super slow, gradual process of chemicals getting more and more complex over millions and millions of years on the early Earth. And what's absolutely wild is just how quickly it seems to have gotten started. You've got the Earth forming, then the oceans forming, and then bam, in what is basically a cosmic blink of an eye, we see the first signs of life. And what's even crazier is that all life on Earth today, you, me, that plant on your windowsill, the weird bacteria in a deep sea vent, we can trace it all back to a single population of organisms we call LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. So how did we get from a bunch of simple chemicals to LUCA? Well, that's where scientists are still fiercely debating. It's kind of like a detective story. You've got the RNA first camp, and they argue the key was a molecule that could copy itself. Then you have the metabolism first folks, who think it all started with little engines of chemical reactions, maybe near those deep sea vents. And then there's the compartment first view, which says none of it mattered until you had a little container, a cell membrane, to keep all the good stuff from just floating away. The real answer? It might just be a little bit of all three. Okay, you're going to want to buckle in for this next part, because this is where our whole perspective is about to get way, way bigger. So we have this neat little checklist for life on Earth, but what if? What if that checklist is just too specific? What if, by only looking for life exactly as we know it, we're missing the entire giant cosmic picture? And I love this analogy right here. A group of astrobiologists basically said that looking for life in the universe is like playing darts, but we're only looking at the bullseye. We're so focused on finding another us that we might be completely ignoring the rest of the dartboard, where all sorts of other amazing things could be happening. And this is the brilliant solution they came up with. A totally new term, life. So life, with an I, that's our version, that's the bullseye, the carbon and water-based stuff we know and love. But life, with a Y, that's the entire dartboard. It's a much broader idea for any system anywhere in the universe that acts in a lifelike way, no matter what it's made of. So what does something have to do to be called life? Well, these scientists boiled it down to 4 basic pillars. First, it has to suck in energy to keep itself organized. That's dissipation. Think of how a whirlpool pulls in water to keep its shape. Second, it's got to be able to make more of itself, and not just one by one, but exponentially, like how one virus becomes millions. That's autocatalysis. It also needs to keep itself stable. That's homeostasis again.
And finally, and this one's huge, it has to be able to learn and adapt based on what's going on around it. If something out there does these four things, we could call it life, even if it's made of silicon on Titan or living in the plasma of a star.
Okay, let's keep building on this, because now we're going to shift from the what to, well, to the who. We've been talking about life as this collection of chemical processes, right? But some philosophers would argue that that whole view is missing the single most important ingredient.
Now, just let that sink in for a second. This is a really profound idea. It's saying that life isn't just something that happens to matter. It's an active force, an agent that actually takes control of matter and tells it what to do. Life isn't a property of the body, life is the ruler of the body.
And this concept has a name. It's called agency. It's really the difference between a machine that's just, running its programming and a being that's actually making its own choices. From this viewpoint, agency is the thing in the driver's seat, the governor that takes charge and operates the physical stuff it's attached to.
This slide just makes that distinction crystal clear. Think about wetness. It's an emergent quality. You put a bunch of H2O molecules together, you get wetness every single time. It's a passive quality. But agency? That's like the driver of the car. The car doesn't drive itself. And here's the real kicker. You could, in theory, assemble every single atom of a living cell perfectly, put it all together, and there is absolutely no guarantee that the driver, that spark of agency, would show up to turn the key. In fact, so far, it never has. And all of this brings us to our final and maybe the most personal question of all. If we are alive, if we are these strange, active agents in charge of these physical bodies, then what's the whole point? This is where science kind of has to bow out and philosophy gets to take the stage. So, two of the biggest schools of thought on this, nihilism and existentialism, they actually start from the exact same, pretty stark place. They both agree. The universe doesn't come with a prepackaged meaning. There's no instruction manual for our lives, no cosmic purpose assigned to us when we're born.
But this is where they take two totally different paths. The nihilist looks at that blank slate and basically says, well, the story's over before it began. If there's no meaning built in, then any meaning we try to make up is just fake and pointless. But the existentialist? The existentialist looks at that same blank slate and says, this is the beginning of the story. That lack of built-in meaning isn't a curse. It's the ultimate freedom. It means we are the authors and we get to write our own purpose through the choices we make and the actions we take.
And that brings us to the final thought of our explainer, a core idea from existentialism. Existence precedes essence. All that means is that you're not born as something specific with a predefined purpose or essence. You're just born, you exist, and then it's up to you to define who you are. So the final question isn't really, what is the meaning of life? The real question is, what meaning will you create? Thanks so much for joining me today.